So, good afternoon and welcome to July's Partnering for Success webinar. My name is Alicia Hodge, and I am the Director of Member and Legal Services here at Public Entity Partners. And I'm excited today to introduce to you all Josh Suddath, who is the Executive Director for the new Center for Local Planning at the University of Tennessee's Institute for Public Service. Welcome, Josh. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I know you're really busy. I know that this past couple of months have been kind of a whirlwind for you all. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
Absolutely. I appreciate y'all having me.
So I'm going to go ahead and just jump in with the questions, if that's okay with you. And the first thing I want you to talk to us about is your professional background and what led you to the Center for Local Planning.
Sure. Well, beyond professional background, personally, I'm a native West Tennessean. I'm from Wheatley County, Tennessee, originally, where I was born and raised. After I graduated high school out that way, I was in the military for a few years in the Marine Corps and came back and went to school at ETSU, East Tennessee State University, and got my bachelor's and master's degree out there. My master's degree was in public administration, focusing on planning and development. And that worked out into eventually some internships and that kind of thing. And my wife and I relocated to Memphis for her to go to pharmacy school, and ended up working for Mr. Llewellyn, James Llewellyn, there in Collierville, and becoming his assistant town administrator. Spent a little time after that in Middle Tennessee, working for the state for TDOT, where I managed a statewide transportation planning program. And after that, I went to work for Sumner County government for Mayor Anthony Holt at the time, and then later on John Isbell as the director of planning and engineering for Sumner County. Which, if you know Sumner County, that's one of the areas around Nashville that's been experiencing quite a bit of population growth and that kind of thing in the last few years, last few decades, really. And so after that, I stayed there about 7.5 years, and then this position came along here at the University of Tennessee, where I had the opportunity to be the first executive director for the new Center for Local Planning that had been established. And I've been on board here since October, and so I guess it's right around 9 months, something like that. I've been on board, and it's been, as you said, it's a whirlwind. That's a good way to put it. It's been a good bit of traveling and meeting lots and lots of new people, and just trying to assess the needs really at this stage of the game and get staffed up.
Yeah, so we'll talk about assessing needs in just a few minutes, but so 9 months in, tell us what it's been like standing up a new agency. I know that is a very big feat.
It's been the one of the best. It's been a challenge, of course. It's a logistical challenge when you're starting from nothing. I was the first employee, and came in, didn't really know the UT organization, so you have to learn how the copy machine works and everything else.
I've done that.
Yeah, yeah. And so everything from that to learning the hiring process and the purchasing process and all those kinds of things. But so it's a challenge, but it's been one of the best experiences in my entire career, in two ways. One, internally to the University of Tennessee, it's just one of the best groups of folks that I've ever worked with. And anybody that's dealt with MTAS and CTAS and all these agencies here at the Institute for Public Service knows that they're consummate professionals that are here to help, and that goes for the folks inside the machine as well as the customers on the outside. So that part of it's been just absolutely phenomenal. I like to say that IPS is the most. You hear about dysfunctional organizations. IPS is the most functional organization that I think I've ever worked for, and that's not a ding on anywhere else that I've ever worked. It's just under Dr. Bird's leadership, this place is really it runs like a Swiss watch, and it's been great. The other side of it is externally. That's been phenomenal as well. Getting to travel the state, and I've been from Memphis to the Tri-Cities, speaking to folks on different panels and speaking to different groups and meeting with elected officials and those kinds of things, and attending conferences and speaking at conferences and that kind of thing. And the response has been great. And coming into it, I'm not a stranger to the planning world, but coming into it, it has been eye opening to me, the need that there is across the state for planning assistance, and just help. I know we'll be talking about a lot of things we're working on and the needs that are out there across the state, but that need for education is huge. And as we're the University of Tennessee, we're very well positioned to help do that.
Absolutely. So let's get into a little bit about the office. So tell us about the mission of the office and generally what kind of services you all provide.
So, our mission, as I alluded to just a moment ago, is we're not in the regulatory business. We're not here to come to any city or county and say, here's what we're going to require you to do or what you have to do. What we're here to do is to help folks understand here's what the law says. Here's what the state legislature has required this year now that you've got to do, and here's how you do it. And that's just one example, but we're here to provide that professional technical assistance that I think is really lacking across a lot of the state. And we're building a team here. We've got folks on staff here that have worked as planning directors for decades. That are employees now here at the Center for Local Planning, and we're here to come to your community. I like to kind of describe the way we do things is if you know how MTAS and CTAS function, they're out in the communities. They provide that direct assistance, hands-on. We're like MTAS and CTAS, but for planning. Is kind of how I describe it to folks. And so that's the biggest thing that we're doing right now is doing that engagement. But the stuff that our core areas of focus, is the technical assistance, helping people understand how to do things right. If that's amending the zoning code or updating their subdivision regulations or publishing public notice and getting it on the website, all the things you have to do. So technical assistance, policy research, if there's new issues that are coming down the pike, if there's new regulatory requirements that the legislature has imposed on local governments, we're publishing policy papers and that kind of thing to help folks understand. Here's what the law says, and here's the best practices on how to comply with it and make your organization run a little better too. The education thing, like I said, is huge. We do a lot of education, going out and speaking to planning commissions. As you may know, Alicia, the planning commissions and boards of zoning appeals, they're required to have at least 4 hours of training each year, and so we are glad to assist with that. We've got a planning commissioner academy that we've stood up that we'll be doing the first session on tomorrow, the first class tomorrow. That's a pilot program that we're doing with about 30 city and county planning commissioners from across the state. And that's a partnership with MTAS and CTAS. And so that's another educational area that we're getting into with communities. And then there's other things that are really at the heart of why the Center for Local Planning was created. Growth management, helping cities to understand and counties to understand. If you're concerned about growth as a local official, okay, that's good, but you can't just go do it. You can't try to regulate it however you want to.
Right.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And but there are ways that you can legally and ethically regulate growth and get your arms around those issues and deal fairly with everybody that's involved. And so we're here to help with that. Whether it takes the form of rural preservation or whatever you want to call it, but helping communities get policies in place that reflect their values. And then
That's a lot.
yeah,
That's a lot. Yeah.
and then mapping. We assist with GIS and mapping. We've got a new GIS person that just started a few days ago, and then our last area of focus is working with other higher education institutions across the state, University of Memphis and other folks, and that are in this space, teaching planning, and so we work with them too.
So I really want to go back to one of the things that you talked about kind of first off in that response that you provided about actually going out into the communities. So one of the things that I've seen at my time at MTAS, when I was at MTAS, was just that a lot of local governments don't have planning professionals on their staff. And so there has not been up until this point, especially when the state dissolved its offices several years ago, really a dedicated place outside of the planning districts or the development districts that really helped with planning. So talk a little bit more about what you all do from a needs assessment standpoint, like you talked about to begin with, when you are talking to these local governments.
Yeah, so the you mentioned the state planning office that existed, and a lot of folks may know that office was abolished in 2008, I believe, 2008, 2010, that time frame. during the Great Recession. And so that office went away, and there's a big void that was left because that office did everything from plans review, like reviewing plats and site plans, to providing really statewide advice and assistance and helping with big issue, big picture issues. And so the development districts have, as you mentioned, they've done a phenomenal job, in my opinion, of stepping in as cities and counties are able to have contracts with them and that kind of thing, to do plans review, to do the site plan review, to staff the planning commissions day to day and provide that professional planning assistance in lieu of those communities hiring somebody full time. And so they've stepped into the breach and done a good job across the state in that regard. But it's the statewide piece that I think has been missing. So when the legislature comes down with new requirements, there really hasn't been a way for that to reach everybody in the state very well. I mean, from a planning perspective, you might have non-planning organizations that disseminate the information, but there hasn't been a professional planning group that's been out there that gets that message out. And so that's where I think we fill a niche, whether it's requirement complying with new state laws, helping to maybe promulgate model codes if there are certain issues that come up. And data centers is probably something we might talk about
Yeah.
today. Things like that, where there's global issues, big issues that communities are dealing with across the state. And rather than having a patchwork where in one community they do it this way, and another community is like going to another country almost. Helping everybody to understand here's a good defensible way to address this problem, and that's good for economic development as well. When you have a somewhat consistent regulatory understanding, it makes it so that you're not going from to almost, like I said, to a different country every time you go to a different community to address to try to do a project.
Yeah, and that's good for us too at PEP, because that's one of the things that we've consistently heard even before I came to PEP, was just a kind of about the patchwork of different regulations depending on which local government you were actually operating in. And I've heard that a lot, and I think that's why we see some of the lawsuits that we have seen. Um, and we'll talk about that a little bit also. So if let's talk a little bit about one of the things that you also said, in terms of the policy guidance that you all provide. So I have really appreciated that. I mean, I'm a lawyer and I'm kind of a nerd about those things, but I really have appreciated that, because I think that those policy guides are very helpful. So just talk about some of the ones that you all have put out already.
Yeah, so we put out several, and there's the more we work on them, the more we realize that there's a lot that needs to be said across the state, and so we'll pick a topic, and internally we work on it as a team, and we bring in our friends at MTAS and CTAS, and there's such a depth of knowledge across IPS, and so we try to lean into that and work with those folks. But some of the things that we've addressed so far have been, like I talked about, new legislation that's come down from the state General Assembly. One of them was related to Public Chapter 140, which came out last year, which is related to development fees. And so local governments have to document their development fees and justify why they've set them where they've set them. And that's a big change. Communities haven't really had to do that in the past.
Absolutely.
Now
It's
they do.
huge. Hmm.
And so every community in the state has had to try to get their arms around that and have something written down. And the statute doesn't necessarily say what you have to set the fees at. Just you got to be transparent about it. You got to spell it out. And so we published a policy guide on that. That was our first policy guide. And with our friends at MTAS and CTAS, we also did a webinar on that. That was pretty well received, I think, and I got a lot of positive feedback from it, and it was well attended. We had a couple hundred folks that had logged in that watched it with us when we did it a couple months ago, and so that's a model that we're going to do a lot of. I think we'll come up with a policy guide where we have it written down, and then we'll do a class on it, essentially in an online format like what we're doing today, to talk people through it and answer questions as time allows. And we typically will come out with a FAQ after as well for any questions we didn't get to. So that was the first one. We've done another one. Another policy guide has come out related to development review. So cities and counties now, there's very strict statutory requirements for how quickly they have to turn around development applications and get them on the agenda. And there's automatic approvals now if you don't do those things. And so we've got a policy guide out on that. We'll be doing another webinar with MTAS and CTAS July 29th. I'm very much looking forward to that one. I really suspect that one's going to be even more well attended. I hope it will be because we've gotten a whole bunch of questions about that, and so about this one because there's a lot of people that are very concerned as far as their staffing levels and those kinds of things on how they're going to be able to address that one. We've also done policy guides on extraterritorial planning and zoning, and so cities. There's a new law that came out that essentially allowed a county commission to take away the city's ability to do planning outside the city limits if they want to, and so we've put that out. It's kind of gratifying to see these documents kind of circulate around the state and newspapers pick them up and reference them and those kinds of things, and that's happened with that one in East Tennessee. And we've had some others as well. I won't bore everybody to death, but it's as you can see that, and as we keep going, there's other things that we realize that we've got to tackle. Data
Absolutely.
centers and that kind of thing is one of them that's going to be on the docket here for too long.
Yeah. So you also talked about doing the training that followed up from the policy guide. So are those webinars, were they recorded? Are they on y'all's website? How can people access those?
Yes, ma'am. They're recorded. Our website just went live a few days ago, actually, so I don't know if they're up there yet. They will be. I know the policy guide is on there. We did record the webinar though, and we will be getting that. And I can, if there's anybody that would like to get a copy of that, they can send an email to planning@tennessee.edu, and we'll be glad to get them any information that they might want to have.
Okay. We'll probably share that with some people that we work with on a regular basis so that they have that. Thank you for that. So shifting gears a little bit, what are some of the most significant land use and planning issues that you would say are impacting local governments right now?
Well, right now, the one that everybody almost anywhere you go, any city and county in the state of Tennessee, it's data centers. That's the biggie right now that folks are talking about. And so we've got another publication that's going to be coming out soon. It's final draft form right now, but it's related to the County Powers Act and doesn't necessarily relate to municipalities as much, but it deals with some ways that communities or counties are dealing with things like data centers and rock quarries and other really intensive uses. Some of that stuff has gone to court recently, and there's a big case out of Grundy County that really changed the game on a lot of that stuff. And kind of what the judges, what the court seemed to say is, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just reading it, but it seemed like they're pushing folks to if you want to regulate those kinds of uses the way that folks want to regulate them, you're going to have to look at adopting zoning. And so there's a whole lot of communities across the state that don't have zoning. It's about half of the counties in the state of Tennessee don't have zoning, and there's no judgment call from us on that. That's a community decision that they all have to make. But when communities want to deal with these kinds of issues, if you want to deal with data centers and find appropriate places for those things to go in your community, zoning is the tool that the state legislature has given you. There's a toolbox they've created. As I kind of said earlier, you can't make it up. You can't just do whatever you want. There's a toolbox that the General Assembly has created, and zoning is that's the wrench that you can use. And so communities that are interested in regulating those things are probably going to need to take a look at that if that's what they want to do, because you can't. What the Tennessee Supreme Court recently said really is you can't zone without zoning. And so if you want to do zoning, then you got to adopt zoning. And so that's a real biggie that around here right now, and it's stemming from data centers. But other than that, it's infrastructure is where we've experienced a whole lot of growth. There's a whole lot of strain. Water capacity, sewer capacity is a huge issue across the state. You hear about electrical capacity as well. That's mostly tied to the data center argument.
Right.
And the General Assembly's done a few things related to that recently, make sure that data centers pay their own way. But infrastructure, data centers, and just rural preservation in general, when is the term, you can call it conservation or whatever you want to call it. But when you have a big influx in population like we've had in the last decade or so, a lot of growth, a lot of farmland being converted. That raises a lot of questions about, what are we going to, or how are we going to maintain our character as a state if that growth keeps occurring. And I was on Farm Bureau's podcast a while back, and during a conversation, I said, everybody needs a place to live, but everybody also needs a place to eat, or
Mhm.
everybody also needs needs to eat.
Right, that's right.
And so you got to be able to do both of those things. And so that's the crux of figuring out attainable housing, affordable housing, and also the farmland that feeds us all, and trying to do both of those things. That's a lot of stuff, but those are the big issues across the state that places are dealing with.
Yeah. And I think a lot of places are grappling with multiple of those issues. I know that, I mean, I continue to see, and we've even had some conversations here around the moratoriums that certain places have put on the data centers. I mean, being so close to Nashville, we've heard about all of those conversations. And even in small communities, I mean, that's something that we've heard a lot about. The infrastructure needs that you spoke about, that is something when we go out and we do our field visits. I can't tell you the number of times that I have been in offices with city recorders and mayors, and they have talked about having moratoriums because they don't have water capacity. And I mean that's a huge issue for a lot of our local governments.
Yep, yep,
So
and
I'm
that
glad that y'all are there to help address some of those things and how some of that can be regulated.
Yeah, and things like water moratorium. When if you're under a development moratorium from a TDEC order that's related to water or sewer, that's eminently defensible. I think it's something that you really don't have a choice of it when you're a community. Some of the other moratoria, I'm not going to try to. I'm not a lawyer, like I said. I'm not going to offer legal. Some of the things that folks are doing, I'm not totally sure that the General Assembly I'm not totally sure that some of the laws that have been passed in the last few years support a lot of that in terms of vested rights, in terms of the pending ordinance doctrine.
Hmm.
So essentially, the laws that have come down from the state level recently have really made it so that communities have to consider an application as it's received based on the rules they have that day.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, so there's probably some things that'll shake out at the legal level in the future. I'm sure on some of those questions.
Yeah.
But the advice that's been given from the attorneys at MTAS and CTAS here has been pretty consistent that you tread very carefully when it comes to those kinds of moratoria, and
Absolutely.
consult very
Yeah.
closely with your attorneys.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I want to talk about, you just said something that triggered a question that I also want to talk about in terms of vested property rights. And are you all planning to do anything around vested property rights? Because I know that that is a huge issue in a lot of places. Also, just knowing when all the triggers are and what you can do and when you can pull back from a development because they've not done what they needed to do in the required timeframes.
That's definitely something that's on the list that keeps getting longer and longer. But yeah, there's and it's timely though because the legislature, I think it was last year, updated that. At one time,
Hmm.
development projects vested upon approval of a development plan, but now they vest upon submittal of a substantially compliant application.
Hmm.
So communities are encouraged by the statute to define all that, what is substantially compliant and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of work that involves as far as updating your ordinances and that kind of thing that probably a lot of places have not done. So yeah, it's definitely something that we've noted that there's a need out there on that, and it's something we'll be looking at doing in the future.
Right. So I think what you have just described to us goes exactly to my next question. So I've been practicing municipal law for a long time. And I feel like that land use and planning is one of the most complicated areas of municipal law. And I have my own theories about why that is. But do you agree that it's a complicated area? And if so, why do you think that is?
It's very complicated. And I didn't really realize until I got into my professional career that a lot of attorneys don't receive much training on land use law. They might have one class that they do that touches on it in law school, and that's about it. And so they come into a lot of attorneys come into it a little unsure of the landscape, but but yeah, it's definitely complicated. And the reason that I think it is so complicated is because it's not, and this is not to diminish any other field, but like taxes, that's obviously complicated too. But you can typically point to the statute and what it says, and here's the deal, and here's the tax rate. At the local level, it's pretty easy. At the federal level, I guess it gets a lot more complicated. But when you're talking about land use, that you're talking about then the balancing act with private property rights and the public good, whatever that is, and that's determined by elected officials, and balancing that and trying to figure out, what does the community want first, which is a huge challenge, and then trying to apply that in a bunch of regulations to reality. And so and that's where it gets really messy because you have a whole lot of different ideas about how things should be applied, and a whole lot of different property owners with a whole lot of different goals. And then you have the law that you have to comply with at the state level. The cities and counties can only do what they're specifically authorized to do by the state, and so there's just so many avenues there, because the people who are subject to those regulations when they're trying to do a project, sometimes they feel like, and they may be right in some circumstances, that some of their property has been taken from them. And so that's where you go to court. That's where
Right.
you go to court. And it all ties back, as you know, to the Constitution and what governments can take without compensation. And so zoning ties into planning, and zoning ties into all that. And like the Board of Zoning Appeals, for example, the only appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals is to a judge. You got to go to Chancery Court if you want to appeal the Board of Zoning Appeals decision, or whichever court it
Mhm.
might be. And so it's inherently litigious, and it's relatively new. That's the other thing too, is that zoning is not something that came over when they landed on Plymouth Rock. It's something that was invented in the early 20th century, and to some extent, we're still trying to figure it all out. I think, and because things change constantly, so you can have regulations that fit, for the 1980s, but we're not in the 1980s anymore.
Right.
Data centers and drive-through car washes and all these things, they didn't exist back then, and
Right.
cell towers, and so trying to keep up with the times, and amend your regulations and that kind of thing. There's just so many different opportunities for things to get litigious and controversial.
Well, and that leads us into my next question. That is exactly my next question is about the litigation. So we're municipal, and we have seen a stark increase in land use cases recently. And so why do you think that, I mean, besides like the ever-changing landscape and just kind of the hodgepodge of depending on where you are, what a local government is doing, do you think that there's any other impetus for the increased litigation that we actually are seeing across the country? It's not something that is isolated to this municipal pool. I think that in everything that I've read, it's just an increase of litigation across the country.
But I think, it's the movement of people and the change that you see, is and so uh, you have folks that maybe they've been here, or any, Tennessee is we're talking about today, but like you said, it's in a lot of other places too. But you have folks that have been here for a long time, or maybe not that long, and they don't want anything to really change. On the other side of it, you have people with substantially more money probably behind a lot of development now in the state of Tennessee than what you used to have, that are trying to accomplish something with their investment. And so, when it gets to the planning commission or board of zoning appeals or the elected body or whatever, um, there's a whole lot more resistance. I think probably people are a lot more organized than they used to be. Social media has changed fundamentally the way that the public interactions go, and the way that the debates over these issues happen. And so, you have again those opportunities for projects to maybe feel like they've not been treated fairly, because people are so galvanized and they're so organized, and sometimes that might get ahead And that's not to say that any side's in the wrong all the time, but there are times probably where that debate gets ahead of what the local government's regulations actually allow.
Hmm.
You might have some situations where some local governments are denying things that are holding up things or whatever the case may be, that they may not have the ability to do. And so, again, as you have, as the debate has gotten a lot more contentious, you have a lot more of those situations where folks are, I think maybe there's some situations where things get denied, and we'll see what happens in court, kind of a situation. You probably I'd say folks aren't listening to their lawyers or their planners, but there are times maybe where they're not paying as much heed to that as they should.
Right. And so, in light of those things, do you have any best practice recommendations for BZAs or for planning commissions that find themselves in situations where they have a new development that somebody is proposing and they really do need to make the right decision? What are your best practice recommendations for those things?
So for communities in general, and this is probably more aimed at the elected officials, is invest in planning. Invest in it. Spend time for the governing body to learn about this stuff, and go to training, whether that's with folks, going to TML meetings or going to TAPA meetings, Tennessee chapter of the American Planning Association, or bringing folks in, consultants or the Center for Local Planning to come and do training for you, to help you understand the law and what you can and can't do, and the difference between administrative and legislative decisions and those kinds of things. Spending money on training, spending money on the staff, the professional staff, whose job it is to make sure that these things are being done in accordance with the law and with the local regulations. It's just so easy for this stuff. It's so complicated. It just is. It's complicated. Like I said, you got people's livelihoods and money on one hand, and people's homes and their way of life they feel like on the other. It's very complicated, and if you don't have professional hands that are on those applications that help to make sure that they're reviewed in the time that they're required to be reviewed in, and that they're placed on the agenda and they're advertised the way that they're supposed to be, that investment in planning, it's an investment that will save you on legal fees over time. I really do believe it's well worth the investment. And so, investing in planning, investing in training, the governing body has the purse strings, and so they're the ones that are able to do that. But for the appointed members, go to the training, listen,
Mhm.
read your packet, listen to what the staff has to say, talk to the staff, um, uh, try to pick their brain when you're looking at your packet. What can we do? What can't we do? Understand where your authority derives from on those things. And the most important thing is listen to your legal counsel. And I'm not just saying that because you're a lawyer,
But I appreciate that.
but I would encourage folks. It always surprises me how few planning commissions across the state are staffed with an attorney. Most of them don't have an attorney there. And that's something that, of course, and I understand there's a cost associated with that. But that attorney can help the planning commission understand, the bounds of their authority and keep things from going off the rails to where you end up in court and end up having to pay legal fees or whatever might happen. And so having that attorney there and listening to their advice is a big one too.
Thank you. Those are some really solid best practice recommendations. I appreciate you sharing those. So one more pivot before we close out our time together. So I did look at y'all's website in preparation for today, and I know that you all have some things that are coming soon. So tell us about some of the things you're working on for the immediate future.
Well, so I mentioned the Planning Commissioner Academy. That's something that it's a pilot program, as I said, this year, but we're hopeful it'll be successful. It's a multi-part series that these folks have signed up for. That'll take us through the rest of the year pretty much, where it'll take you through all different aspects of the planning process, constitutional basis for zoning, intro to planning, fundamentals of zoning, working with the public, all these different topics. So we're really excited about that. We think that has a lot of potential. There's a lot of interest across the state. We had to tell a lot of folks no because we only had so many seats available.
That's a
Uh,
good problem to have.
that's a good one. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
good. As I mentioned, more policy papers, County Powers Act, that one will be coming out soon. The Board of Zoning Appeals. There's a lot of stuff that's changed with the Board of Zoning Appeals as far as it's very arcane, but review of special exceptions and the authority of the BZA has been kind of changed around a little bit by the
Hmm.
legislature. So there's another policy paper we'll be doing on that at some point. Vested property rights, as you said, that's on our radar. And comprehensive growth planning. We're hoping between now and the end of the year to have a webinar with folks across the state to help everybody understand the process for amending your urban growth boundaries and doing all that stuff that was required by Public Chapter 1101. And
Hmm.
those are some of the things we have on the near term horizon here in the next 6 months to a year.
Okay. So what are your long-term goals for the agency? What are you looking forward to and wanting to do long term?
Well, long term, we're staffing up, as I mentioned, with the funding we have available. We'll probably be somewhere less than a dozen people total, and so we have to be realistic about what we can accomplish across the state. As I said, we're not going to be able to review site plans and plats for every city and county in the state. That's not realistic. But we are looking to expand on those educational items that I've talked about, things like the Planning Commissioner Academy, getting in front of more elected bodies. I really think that's important. The elected bodies don't, I feel like they just don't receive the amount of training that they need um, based on, in order to deal with the complexity of the
Right.
that they're dealing.
Hmm.
It's so complicated. And they understand that because, as I said, as I've gone across the state, uh, it's I joke around to say it's like I've got a big Thanksgiving turkey and everybody's starving to death. Like everybody is really, really hungry
Hmm.
for this information almost everywhere you go. And so we're getting a lot of invitations to go to communities. And I want to really expand on that. We got a couple of new people that'll be starting soon that are extraordinarily well qualified to help us continue to do that. But we really want to get in front of the elected bodies and the planning commissions and continue to do more in-person training. That's a biggie that I want us to really, really spend a lot of time on. And then we have a kind of a concept that we're working on. It's probably a little early to talk about it, but I'll talk about it anyway. We want to, an idea that we have is building a certification program for staff at the local level. Most communities, as you said, don't have a professional planner on staff, but most of them will have somebody that's functioning as a building official or something like
Hmm.
that, administers the zoning code. And so we'd like to at some point work toward building like a zoning administrator certification program across the state. There is no certification for those folks. There's AICP if you're a professional planner,
Right.
but there's no accreditation that you can get to be a zoning code administrator across the state. And so that's something that could I think bring a lot of value because you have so many of these folks that get hired in to do this job. Then maybe they work for the county mayor or something as the secretary or something, and they're
Right.
the zoning administrator, and they're like, I don't even know what zoning is. Like,
Hmm.
what do I need to do? We really strongly feel that is an area where we can bring a lot of value. And you talk about consistency and that kind of thing across the state, where you have all these people that have kind of been thrust into that job in smaller communities, particularly. If they can get a good foundation of without going to grad school and learning about planning, they can learn how to administer the zoning code and treat folks fairly and comply with the law. That'll go a long way. That'll go a long way. And you talk about litigation and those kinds of things, it'll probably head off of quite a bit of that too.
Absolutely. You see me writing down, like I'm writing all of these things down that y'all are planning to do, so that we can talk about them when we go out in the field and talk with our insureds about things that they really need to pay attention to that y'all are doing. So I appreciate you sharing what the vision is. Um, so I hear what your vision is. I know that there are all of these things that are happening across the country and a lot of things happening in Tennessee from a land use perspective. What do you see as some of the emerging issues that local governments need to be aware, are likely coming down the pike? They might be happening in other places right now, and they've not gotten to Tennessee yet. But talk to me about intervals. So in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, what are some of the emerging issues that you think, that people need to be preparing for?
Well, the data center thing is it's now, but it's not going away.
Hmm.
It's not going away, and I don't predict the future or what anybody's going to do, but I can't help but feel like there's going to be some more stuff at the state or federal level potentially. It reminds me a whole lot of like really early in my career, and it was kind of tapering down even at that time, but a lot of the debate around cell towers and that kind
Oh
of
yeah.
thing a long time ago. And
Hmm.
and what happened was the federal government eventually kind of preempted a whole lot of stuff.
Right.
They came in and said, "Hey, you can't take these things into account when you're considering it, and you can do this. You can regulate landscaping, and you can kind of, site plan review and that kind of thing, but you can't forbid them."
Right.
I'm not saying that's going to happen with data centers, but I think there will be some stuff that'll come down, and so I think that it seems like the trend is in a lot of ways, and is going to be more on a lot, not just on data centers, not just on that topic, but just the things that we've been seeing the last few years has been the General Assembly really focusing in on the planning process a whole lot more than they used to. And so, when we were talking earlier about one of the new laws that we're doing a webinar on that is related to development review. There's these timelines now for development review and automatic approvals, and that's kind of new. There's been some stuff on the
Hmm.
statute for a long time related to plats and stuff, but this is a whole lot more involved, and it's aimed at the professional staff and the communities that don't have professional staff. It doesn't matter; you're still subject to the
Exactly.
state requirements. And so what I think is that in the short term and the longer term, communities need to be thinking about how they're going to invest in their planning departments, and then because it's still very important to these communities, and it should be to make sure the best possible development that they can get it to comply with their standards and that kind of thing. But to do that, it's going to require an investment in staff in order to do it within the timelines. And so I feel like that's a trend that has been coming along for a while, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that there's probably been some situations. There's always examples of projects that have maybe been delayed for a long, long time that it wasn't necessary, those kinds of things. And so I think the General Assembly is responsive to those concerns. And so I see more things coming down that restrict local governments in the way that they handle things, and it may give them more freedom for administrative approvals to let the professional staff handle things if they have them. But there may be things that are required to be handled in a certain manner, and that's where again having that professional staff and having that investment made in your community will pay dividends because when you don't comply with the law, folks on the other end of it, the development community, they're going to notice.
Exactly. So, with all of that, do you have any parting words of wisdom or any closing thoughts that you want to share?
Wisdom is always in short supply with me, but I really appreciate y'all having me on and talking to you the kind of synergies there between what we're doing, educating folks, and the goal of it is to make things run more smoothly and achieve the outcomes that communities want to achieve within the law. And so I think if it's done across the state, I think it could result in some of the things you're talking about in terms of less claims and those kinds of things. So I really appreciate you having me on. That's really not an angle that I had thought much about, but we're definitely thinking about it now.
Well, and we appreciate you coming, spending the time with us, answering the questions. We will share this out widely because I think that this is really important. I am excited for the work that your office is going to do, and is doing already because, like I said, having practiced municipal law for a long time, I know that this is an area that there has been a gap in for a long time. And so I'm excited. I'm excited for local governments. I'm especially excited for municipalities and for our insureds because they have a resource that I know is going to be extremely helpful to them. And speaking of that, if you'll talk about how people can get in contact with your office, who your staff members are, if we can put that slide up, that would be great.
Yeah. So you can, as I mentioned earlier in our talk, you can shoot us an email at planning@tennessee.edu. If you just have any general questions, that actually goes into my inbox, and so I'll get it. And if it requires me to forward it to the appropriate person, I'm always glad to do that. Right now, as I mentioned, we're building a team, and so we have several folks across the state, and we're in the process of hiring a few more. Uh, the folks on the screen there are the folks we have on board at this time. Adam McCormick there is our Middle Tennessee Senior Division Planner. He's the former planning director for the city of Goodlettsville. I believe he was at White House prior to that.
Okay.
Phenomenal resource. He's meeting with the city right now, I believe, helping them with some of this development review stuff, and he's doing a great job. Amber Torbett is the former planning director for Sullivan County government. She was director of planning and codes there for about 25 years. She's in East Tennessee. She's doing a phenomenal job as well. Jordan McKenzie is just a fantastic, dynamic young planner. I'm be so excited to have him on board. He's come to us from the Memphis and Shelby County Redevelopment Agency, and he worked for various other small communities as a planning consultant and a planner, and worked for the city of Memphis for a certain number of years as a planner too. And so he brings a wealth of information and a lot of tech savvy too that I'm happy to lean on. The guy, he puts together a mean presentation. And JP Finnegan there at the bottom is our most recent hire. He's our GIS project manager. He's in the office next to me here in Nashville at the Polk building where we're at. And he's getting his feet under him right now. But he's as we speak, he's in his office building some data sets and some maps related to planning regulations and those kinds of things across the state of Tennessee. And we'll have a couple other staff coming on soon. Like I said, we've got an East Tennessee planner starting soon, another Middle Tennessee planner that'll be starting soon, and we're advertising for another Memphis, West Tennessee rather, planning professional as well.
Well, thank you, Josh, for everything that you've shared with us this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I know that our insureds will appreciate the information that you've provided today, and I am confident that you will have a lot more calls coming from the PEP insureds after this. And just congratulations on what your office has done already, and the great things that I know that y'all are going to do in the future. So again, thank you.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So, I want you all to think about all the things that Josh said today. Also, visit their website, look at those policy guides because, like I said, they are very informative. The webinar that he said that they have coming up on July 29th, I would encourage you to participate in that as well. In terms of what we have coming up next, we have our next Partnering for Success webinar scheduled for September 9th at 1 o'clock. Haley Gallick, our Director of Underwriting, will be talking about the intersection of underwriting and loss control, and we hope that you all can join us then. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.